I'd like to start by just drawing your attention to the screens. We'd like to start this session with a video. Thank you.
The last year has been a time of growth for the Bluefield University community. As we look back at all that was happening prior to the academic year, we realized it was going to be a challenging time as our students returned to campus, but we were committed to having the hard conversations around race. And we had also determined to conduct a diversity audit and to have conversations and focus groups with our students so that we would be in communication with one another throughout the academic year.
One of the great things that transpired over the course of the year was the designation of the coordinator for belonging in Ms. Sherelle Morgan. So now our student athletes had a place to go. They had a place that they could share and they could open up and be confident in certain situations.
It was just a few weeks after that the men's basketball team began kneeling during the national anthem.
I was very proud of our men's basketball team for taking a stand for social injustice, as they took a stand for what they believe was the right thing to do. Not many people understood the why. And the most ironic thing is, as we even met with student athletes and met with each of our 20 teams, they didn't even know why our team knelt.
I think our why for why we knelt was to take a stand for the things that we saw, like the problems that we saw in America, social injustice, killing of African Americans, storming of the Capitol. I think our why was really just to take a stand. As a team, we came together and we saw things were wrong with what was going on in our nation, and took a courageous act to kneel, risking being suspended. And you know, things are still, you know, need to be changed, but it was a good step for, you know, the things we want to see accomplished.
The team members shared with me that they were not kneeling in disrespect to the flag or to the country, but that it was related to social injustices and specifically around the events of January 6th. And while the team and the university could not reconcile our differences around the position, they're wanting to kneel juxtaposed with the institution's policy prohibiting that practice. We discussed a whole host of options that could be available to them if they chose.
And despite the suspension of our team, they were still awarded with the Perry Wallace Award of Courage. The why wasn't about the flag, nor was it about the national anthem, but it was more to raise consciousness around the hypocrisy of what happens when a team kneels or Kaepernick kneels, up against the hypocrisy of what transpired on January 6th and the violent protests that took place.
We had those conversations, those hard conversations with each other of why we were doing it. At first they didn't really know, and then as it went on, we put the pieces together. We knew why we was kneeling. Had nothing to do with the flag. It had everything to do with social injustice and what was going on in the world.
We talked about their personal stories. We talked about the communities in which they've experienced racial injustices themselves or witnessed it in that of others. As I listened to their stories, I truly, my heart was broken. Just hearing some of the pain that they had personally experienced or collectively through their community experiences. I also committed to them the opportunity for a campus forum so that their voices could be heard to the entire campus community, and I'm thankful we were able to have that forum.
We stood up for what we believe in, and that was social injustice. We all believe in that, so we kneeled, and that made changes in the community. The community was behind us, our school was behind us, our coaching staff. even our classmates or professors and stuff like that. I feel like that make a big change. And we started to see more change in the world, like more justice being served, like toward African Americans.
We are wanting every student to feel valued. We want every student to know and to be able to have the difficult conversations that sometimes it takes to help people have a broader understanding and awareness, and for everyone to know that we can together learn and grow in Christ, so that as individuals, as well as a campus community, we can be making a difference.
To be able to stand together, to be able to lock hands in unity, showed such courage during the times that they were going through. So I am committed, our staff is committed to creating the changes that we wish to see here on the Bluefield University campus and throughout the community.
Good morning. Happy Sunday, right? Hi, I'm Jane E. Smith. I'm a member of the Rise Smith Committee, and it gives me great pleasure to introduce our panel this morning. So if you guys could go ahead and come up while I talk a little bit about you, we'll be ready to listen. You've already seen on the video the president and the VP of athletics. So at this time, Dr. David Olive has been at the helm for over 15 years, and Bluefield has been a member of NAIA since its conception. He hired Tanya Walker, the VP of Intercollegiate Athletics, about 2 years ago. And as we all know, we've had pivotal moments in our lives that makes a change. The question is not the situation. The question is how you're going to handle the situation. So at this time, our moderators are Cindy Potter, Columbia College, and Jill Harder. Did I say it right? I got it right, okay. University of Health, Science, and Pharmacy, yes. So without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, your panel for this morning. Thank you.
Thank you, Janet. Can you hear me? Okay. Want to welcome everybody and again say good morning and thanks for joining us on this early morning. Jill and I have some questions and we're going to ask them, but we also invite you all to ask questions through the app. So please go ahead and submit those as you see fit. So our first question for Tanya is following the men's basketball team kneeling during the national anthem, what were your thoughts on immediate action to take?
Thank you. Good morning to all. It is on. Yes, so I will say in full disclosure, as an African American female, I understood why the team knelt. I understood, like many athletes, many teams were kneeling just to bring an awareness to social injustice. However, as an African American female working at a private institution at that time, I wasn't aware of the institutional policies that were in place because the Constitution, the First Amendment of the Constitution, protects private entities to protect the message of the institution. And so in learning that and in talking with my president, we just had to talk about next steps and what needed to happen. And so we called the coach in after I think the second time that they knelt and explained the policy to our coach who was unaware, and to also charge him with making sure and ensuring that the team knew their why, knowing why they were kneeling. I'm not just kneeling because my teammate is kneeling, but what am I trying to bring across by kneeling as a team? And then asked and offered other opportunities for the team to kneel and to bring about that same type of, just to highlight I just went blank, just to highlight I went totally blank, just to highlight what they were trying to do.
Thanks, Tanya.
Yes.
This question is for you. Maybe. Okay, there we go.
Dr. Olive,
Can you share with us a summary of your initial meeting with the men's basketball team and how you prepared for that?
Yes, thank you. As Tanya was sharing, the day that we all became aware of the men's teams kneeling during the anthem, I began immediately reflecting with both VP Walker and reaching out to our head men's basketball coach to talk with them in order to talk with the team so that we could find what I felt would be a more productive way in communicating what their feelings were and the injustices that they wanted to speak about. And that had always just was the goal from the outset, to find alternative pathways that would move beyond the symbolism of it and some not knowing the why, to give the team a voice and able to enable and empower them to be able to get their message out. And so that was everything from the very beginning. And as I reached out to some of my presidential colleagues to just talk with them, had they had situations similar to this on their campus? If not, what were some of the things that they were doing? How were they talking about it? And so that was how I was preparing myself, as well as in prayer, that when I met with the team, that we would be able to communicate and do so in a realm of love and respect for one another.
And just to piggyback on that, how do you feel like your discussion with the team went, and how was it received by the team?
That's a great question, because it was a heartfelt and a very heart-laden type of conversation. It went on for about 2 hours. Most of that was listening to the team and to their stories. Some were sharing of home experiences and their own communities. Certainly the national events were very much present, the George Floyd and the tragic death and witness of that. Those were heavy things on their minds. And there had also been, unbeknownst to me, a Trump rally, and so the first time I was learning about it was from them, that had occurred back sometime earlier in the fall of, I guess that was been 20, and it came by the streets bordering our campus. And one of the team members was asking, well, why did y'all allow that to occur here on campus? And I was like, well, tell me about it. I'm not aware of it. There wasn't one. We've not approved anything of that nature. But they described the route, and I said, well, those are public streets. We don't control those, so that's a public access way. And that parade ended up going over to City Park, which is adjacent to our campus, and they held a rally outside the football stadium. We leased the football stadium, and so in their minds, we had sponsored or allowed that rally to take place. And I shared with them, we just leased that facility. We don't own it. We don't grant permission for other groups using it. That was the city of Bluefield that did that. And I was trying to create for them a clear separation. We just don't get into political matters, and so we would not sponsor or allow anything like that to occur. But those are some of the things that we were talking about, and certainly as I shared about finding more constructive ways, because of there being, in my mind, some confusion by some that immediately would jump to, this is disrespectful to the flag, and I shared with them, whatever you say is the rationale. That's what's in the minds of folks, and being at that time in a very divisive environment, I was trying to help them to approach things so we could build bridges, to have conversations with people, both sides, without immediately cutting off the conversation and angering half the folks while pleasing perhaps other half. I said, we need to find ways to where we can talk and bring everyone into the dialogue so that they have an understanding of the things that you're wanting corrected in our country.
I'm going to follow up with that as well. Looking back, is there anything that you would have done differently in that situation, meeting with those student athletes?
Well, I felt the conversation was important, and I was trying to get with the team sooner rather than later. So the Monday morning that I had discovered the kneeling that had occurred at the game on Saturday evening, I was immediately in conversation with VP Walker and the head coach, and the team was unfortunately taking off that afternoon and traveling for an away game. And I even offered to do a Zoom with the team once they got to their destination, just so we could have conversation and not put it off. But it wasn't until Friday when they got back to campus and kneeled once again while traveling on the road after being asked not to do that. That was my first opportunity to sit with the team. So I guess if I could have met with the team earlier, that would have been ideal. But just the timing of their travel and my ability to be able to be face-to-face with them was delayed somewhat.
This is for Tanya. So tell us about how you talk to the rest of your student athletes, all your student athletes, to really get an achievable outcome.
Okay. Yeah, so we have 20 teams on the Bluefield campus. And I solicited the assistance from our Dean of Academic Support. And we met individually with each and every team, being able to partner with the smaller teams like golf and tennis. But we learned from them through that meeting that they would rather meet in smaller groups. And oftentimes as athletics directors, we call for a full student athlete body meeting. But I think we got so much more accomplished taking the time to hear them individually. And so our focus of the meeting wasn't about who was right or who was wrong, but we started off with the why. And we asked, do you know why the men's basketball team knelt? And I would venture to say probably 90 to 95% of them said no. And so we entered into the conversation of why they knelt. And so there was a greater understanding. But the focus of the meeting was about change. I'm not trying to tell them that the basketball team was right or wrong, or you should kneel or you should not. But first, why did you come to Bluefield College, college at that time, I think. And then what are the changes that you see that need to take place first on our campus and then as a community? And then lastly, how do we create that change that we want to see? And we received lots of feedback, good feedback for change on the campus. And we put that into a presentation. We shared it with campus leadership and faculty and staff. And so it kind of gave a pathway to what our student athletes are looking for and highlighted some of the issues, concerns, and problems that they were having on our campus.
Our next question could go to either one of you or both of you. What university constituents did you have to involve in implementing the new policies, principles, and positions to support Bluefield in its social justice?
All right. Tanya took on the responsibility of working with our Student Athlete Advisory Council to first and foremost, because this was, again, at the very beginning of the conversation with even the basketball team, where I had even offered for them, one of the players, to take the microphone before the national anthem and speak to concerns of racial injustice. And out of that, Tanya thought, well, this would be great to bring the student athlete the advisory council to come into play, and so it not just be the voice of the men's basketball team, but it could be the voice of our student athletes. And so she took on that task of working with the advisory council to develop a statement that is now read not just before our basketball games, but also all the athletic events, any home contest we have this statement read. That statement was brought to the college leadership team. It was endorsed there and then ultimately went to our Board of Trustees for their endorsement as well.
And SGA.
Oh, yes,
And
and the
SGA.
SGA was involved.
I would also say other constituencies, so we put a task force together from athletics to develop principles for peaceful protest. So it just simply outlines other opportunities, because we're not saying student athletes can't protest. We're just saying not during the national anthem. And so it just gives them some guidelines for every sport and gives them opportunities to protest. Other constituencies, Sherelle, so the coordinator of belonging, came along during this time. She's been a wonderful resource for us, for teams, individuals, faculty, and staff, and to make sure that there's a face and an owner of the work that has to be done, and making sure that we keep it at the forefront of our initiatives.
So how have the changes that you all have made at Bluefield impacted your campus community, and how do you think it can help the rest of us?
I would say first and foremost, it allowed us a space to have the brave conversations. That's the hardest part. And it allowed us to build a sense of trust on our campus, where we can have those conversations, agree to disagree in some regards, to have Sherelle as a person that we can sit and share and just sit in a room and have the conversations, to understand the perspective of others, to understand that there's so many positives in our differences. And that's from department to department and the institution as a whole.
Well, we'd love to hear about any positive outcomes that have happened in the wider community as a result of the way that you handled
Kneeling at the national anthem.
I think one of the positives from my perspective, because this had been an issue of concern that we had talked about at the leadership team level, was how students, and particularly students of color, interact with law enforcement in our local community. As we began having the conversations, even in the forum that occurred, I think it was late February or early March, several even mentioned having incidents, or I remember distinctly one young man coming to my office to share with me a personal interaction that he had had with law enforcement. And so that really drove us to make it happen, because we had talked about it even back having something similar to this in the fall of 2020, but it took place in the spring of 21, but it finally happened. And I went to the local police department, talked with the chief of police, who's a Bluefield graduate. I also talked with the sheriff, who's also a Bluefield graduate, and I said, we have got to have conversation about, so you can hear how some of our students are feeling as they've been stopped and perhaps targeted in their stops, and then they also need to hear from you. And so towards the end of the spring semester, we had one final forum that brought law enforcement representatives onto campus, and while I wish there had been more students there, we asked a lot of tough questions of them, but we also heard some very informative and positive responses back from them. And so that was another, I think, a very valuable piece of this, leading into what has happened this year, where during Black History Month, the BSA asked for this kind of, let's talk about traffic stops. And so we had law enforcement back on campus. We've also started, as of the beginning of this academic year, every Wednesday, we feed law enforcement for free. And so routinely now we see law enforcement officers in our dining hall. And I think that helps in just letting everyone kind of see these are normal people, these are people in the community, these are people here who are meant to protect and to serve our community.
So this one's really live. We talk a lot about your why and why the student athletes knelt. Talk to us a little bit more about how you discuss the why, how you educated your campus community on the why, and how you continue to have those conversations.
I think the first step in discussing the why more broadly was with the town hall that we had. We were able to work with student athletes to first make sure that they knew their why, but to be able to tell their stories. And so we invited the entire campus, faculty, staff, students, and there were 10 or so athletes who told their stories of what had transpired on our campus, whether it be with campus security or faculty members or back home, just so others could understand their perspective, because many times they didn't. And I think that was the first step. Even now, when and going out within the community, it's just having the conversation. One of my coaches, when we were doing like promotions during basketball games, and we were soliciting for gift cards, and the coach goes to the restaurant and asks for a gift card to be used. He gives him the gift card, and then he says, hey, so there are two Bluefields in our area, a Bluefield State University, Bluefield State College, and Bluefield University. And so the manager says, hey, were you the Bluefield that knelt? And he says, yes, and he took the card back. And he says, I'm not interested. So an opportunity for a conversation, just to allow them to understand the why, and to still be a part of what we're doing. I had another colleague who was at the dentist, and as soon as he learned that he worked for Bluefield University, he put his white coat back, and it's like, how about those students? Why did they kneel? So it's just continued conversation.
I'm going to piggyback on that a little bit. I like the story about the gift card. But Dr. Olive, I think that this is really one for you. What was the reaction like from the community and donors and others that support the university financially? Did they understand the why?
Not at the time. We were trying to explain positions, but quickly it escalated to where lines were drawn, and you were either pro kneeling during the anthem or you were anti kneeling during the anthem, and it really became the conversation around kneeling during the anthem, which was a fear that we couldn't really talk about what we wanted to talk about, social and racial injustices. And so, but that was a pretty heated period for several weeks. And there were just people on both sides. So did it affect donations? Yes. One pretty significantly who was pro kneeling during the anthem and basically holding a gift until seeing how all this would play out. And thankfully, they've appreciated the way that we've handled it. So ultimately, we got the gift that was being promised to us. But the unknown factor of who has stopped giving, that's hard to trace. But it certainly there were, and within the community itself, there were clear lines being drawn. Although we live in a more rural area, so tends to be, I'll say, more conservative in its values and outlook. And so there were folks providing estimates of what they thought it was, but it really didn't matter because we weren't able to be communicating the things that we wanted to be communicating to really address what the team was attempting to convey.
But we also received a gift because they knelt and had the courage. And that was, and I can't recall their names, the person who brought the Perry Wallace author on board, and they gave a gift specifically to our men's basketball team. So, more of a loss, but we did gain some.
We've got a question from the audience, and just a reminder to submit those through the app. Can President Olive speak more about the Center of Belonging? Specifically, was the position planned or was it added after the social injustice incidents?
Great question. So in I think it was the spring of 19, the Appalachian College Association, we're a member of that consortia of Central Appalachia, and they had secured funding for any institution that wanted to conduct a diversity audit. And so we had made application for that and had received funding for that, and that survey took place in the fall of 2020, and by November we had the results back, and as a leadership team we were looking at those, and one of the first things it said, well, you don't have a position or an office that relates to diversity. And my reaction to that, one, if you don't have one, that became a negative point on the scoring system. So, you know, it was in the eye of the beholder, of the designer of that survey, or the scale of whether you're a good school or a bad school, was a little prejudiced. But my message to the leadership team at that very time when we were talking about creating that position, I wanted our leadership team to know it was my expectation that doesn't let anyone off the hook, that it now doesn't just focus down to one person who does all of this, because I felt as our role as leaders, we all are responsible for how students interact and belong and feel connected in our institution. And I want all of us to be responsible of being sought out by students who feel there isn't something that's working correctly or someone's treating them unfairly. I don't want us to lose that ability to be leaders in serving in our various roles, that we're relinquishing that in some way just because we now have a person designated specifically for that.
Thank you. I'm going to put you on the spot. You may or may not have this, but this is a question from the audience. Could you read or hit the high points of your pregame announcement about social injustice that's read before all the games?
No, I can't. But I will make sure that that you all have it, and it will be posted as a part of the resources on the website.
Yeah, that's a great question. Our students worked hard on that. I will say the first draft we saw, it was like 2 pages.
We can't read
and we were
that
like, that's not going to hold everybody's attention. We got to work that down. And also in candor, we felt it was lacking any scriptural reference. And so we put that back to the Athletic Advisory Council to work on that, because being a Christian college, and really for me, everything related to DEI comes right out of Scripture. We're to love God and we're to love one another. And so that's just core of who we are. And so that needed to be in the message, and our students were able to provide that.
I guess we need to learn that, huh? We need to learn and walk around knowing. I don't know.
Well, I think really we want to hear from both of you on this one. What do you feel from your perspective? What's the atmosphere on campus like now?
Yeah, I would say, first I'd like to say that it was never really tension-filled, or we didn't walk around like there were these racial issues on campus. But just things that needed to be enhanced. And so now there's a spirit of collegiality around campus. I think we are all open to having those brave conversations, peer-to-peer, student-athlete to administrator. We're willing to listen to one another and garner that greater appreciation for different perspectives. And it's something that is at the forefront of everything that we do.
Yeah, and I'll just add, rather than kind of a one and done, so we did some large forums last year, but our coordinator for belonging continues to just have monthly gatherings. Anyone can show up, there's no topic, and it's just a time for students primarily, but again, it's open to anyone to come and talk about anything that they wish to bring as perhaps a concern or something that may not be working as well as they think it should be on our campus.
Okay, this one is for you, Tanya. Could you elaborate or be really specific? Because I think folks in the room here want to have some action or want to be able to guide their own initiatives on campus. So could you elaborate a little bit more about the outreach discussions that occurred in your campus community, and were university members such as coaches or faculty or staff part of specific training, or what types of steps have you taken and are you planning for the future?
I think the conversation continues. Initially, we met with coaches. I met with coaches. We talked about the policy. We discussed the differences in our personal beliefs, as opposed to, if we are a part of Bluefield University, then these are the parameters that we have to operate within. How do we reach that end goal within these parameters? And so with respect to kneeling, yes, we can kneel. Yes, we can protest. We're just asking not during the playing of the national anthem. Some teams have chosen to stay in locker rooms until the national anthem is played. You see that across the country with different teams. Some teams have linked hands or linked arms. But those conversations are those that were had with staff. We have developed a set of talking points from our Director of Belonging, so that if approached in the community, these are the things that we are saying, and we're not operating from a personal perspective. But you never know when you're going to get hit with a question. You never know when you're going to eat at that restaurant and someone says, hey, you're the AD from the team that knelt. And you just engage in the conversations and really explain the why.
I'm going to go totally off script here and just ask Dr. Olive, what do you feel like are your biggest challenges moving forward, and what steps are you planning on taking moving forward to continue this conversation?
Yeah, so I hope we will continue engagement with law enforcement, because that is, in some ways, the crux of much of the national issues that have occurred, and to rebuild trust that all law enforcement is not bad, because as a society we need to have law and order, and we all want to live in safe communities and to know that we're protected, and so and not feel like you're threatened by those who are to protect and serve you. So the more we can engage in that, I think at our campus we'll continue, as many especially faith-based Christian colleges are, just the boundaries of what the world's message of the fullness of inclusion, and yet within communities like ours around the gender sexuality conversation, it's much different. And so for that individual who wants the expansive, our board of trustees has set the parameters around that as to what is inclusion at a place like Bluefield University. But those will be things we'll continue to be working at, I'm sure, for a long time to come.
All right, this next question is from the audience again. How did the national exposure affect the processes that you were using, or what was taking place on campus?
I'll say we lost the ability to control our message initially, because the news, everything got out of the gate. It was President suspends team for kneeling, but we had to go back and do damage control and really explain. And by that time, people turned a head to it, because they had made up in their own minds, how dare Bluefield University. So that's the one thing that I would say. But going into knowing that the team was going to be suspended, I knew ESPN, Washington Post, NAACP, New York Times, all of them, we were headlined in a way that we didn't desire to be headlined. But yeah, we worked through it.
I think this one's really for Dr. Olive, but Tanya, if you've got something as well. What effect, if any, did the institution's actions have on retention and recruitment of faculty, staff, and students of color?
Amazingly, our retention rate has been going up over the last several years, even in the midst of what happened last spring coming into this year. So that's a positive, and so we feel very fortunate and blessed that students, they understood, and I think they feel they have been heard, and that we're open to having dialogue, and that we're not running from anything or trying to cover anything up. We'll have the conversations, and it's been, again, a positive, because it really could have gotten much worse and turned students away or students driven away, but we did not lose any faculty or staff or any students that I'm aware of due to what occurred last spring.
But we did receive our share of hate mail. Didn't we?
Yeah.
Yes.
A lot of email, phone calls, voice messages.
I'm sure. Inbox is full. Specifically, what were some of those alternatives to kneeling that you provided to the teams or to your overall community to protest without actually kneeling? What were, some of those, down the list alternatives that you offered them?
So what I was offering to the team, kneel before, kneel after the anthem. I suggested something that I later learned from another institution that it's not really allowable or safe, but kneel at tip-off. So don't try that, because I've been told you really can't do that. But my point was, if you want to really start conversation, give up the first basket. And people will ask, why did you give up the first basket? Then you can tell your story why. And it was those things that I was trying to help push them in directions that I thought would be more positively received and carry over to a larger audience that needs to hear the message.
We also recommended a march through the campus. There are significant places on campus that student athletes could rally, and they've done that in protest. Of course, locking hands, locking arms, and we've seen some of that. So shortly after the kneeling, we did have, I think, an alumni group led a protest on the steps of Lansdale. We always now see our basketball team. They are, well, they're in the back, but I think our women's team are locking arms. Some are kneeling at different times with hands on shoulders of other teammates, especially those that really are against kneeling, but in support of the team, if that makes sense. And so those are just some of the other suggestions that were offered, and teams are taking heed to.
I think this is our last question. So when the basketball team would play, what types of feedback or support did they have from the visiting teams, coaches, staff, and those visiting team community?
I think they were supported, and in fact, some of the teams that we were visiting were kneeling as well. And so in their minds, that caused conflict, because they were asking, well, why is it that we're asked not to kneel, but we are seeing that other teams are kneeling when we're going to their spaces? So.
Well, that was a quick one. So I think we have room for one last question. It's the same question. So, but it kind of piggybacks on it. How did you handle visiting teams kneeling during the anthem? Vice versa. When your team visits someone else, but what did you do if other teams visited your court and
we didn't have that?
You didn't have that. Okay, well, that's one less thing to handle, right? That's great. I think we have pretty much exhausted our time. First of all, I'd like to thank everybody who attended today. And most of all, I would like to thank Tanya and Dr. Olive for having the courage to sit up on stage and kind of get grilled on DE&I. I mean, taking a difficult conversation, a difficult situation, and really turning it into a positive conversation and how we can all make a difference on our own campuses. So I would like to thank everyone who is here and, of course, our guests. So thank you so much.